Hello, very beautiful community. Wasn't going to join you today, but I think we need to do a quick grounding reaction to this. So, this is what the President of the United States says. On top of everything else, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland have journeyed to Greenland for purposes unknown. This is a very dangerous situation for the safety, security, and survival of our planet. These countries who are playing this very dangerous game have put a level of risk in play that is not tenable or sustainable. Therefore, it's imperative that in order to protect global peace and security, strong measures will be taken so that this potentially perilous situation end quickly and without question. Starting on Feb 2026, all of the above-mentioned countries will be charged a 10% tariff on any and all goods sent to the United States of America, and it'll go to 25% on June 1st, 2026. So the grave danger to security is if NATO countries have NATO troops on NATO territory. What an outrage. So this is completely inevitable, right, this escalation, but it's still scary and discombobulating. And that's why probably the next main channel video will be about how we need to wake up to the threat that the United States poses to Europe and the threat the United States poses to the West and to itself. And you might say, well, no, surely it's still Russia and China that constitute the main threats to us. And the answer is, make a distinction between Russia and China being worse than the United States, right? Now, Trump isn't necessarily better than Putin if he is allowed free reign, but he's constrained. And so at the moment, of course, it's true that the United States is better than Russia and China. But make a distinction between that, right, and our dependence on the United States. So what you're weighing here in terms of picking out the main threat isn't just which country is most threatening, it's which country is most threatening in combination with us being conjoined in it in a series of relations of dependence. And so I want to just be panoramic and grounding because I want to do a proper analysis of this hopefully in the next few days on the main channel. In no particular order, it's very important to understand that Trump's security justifications are bogus. Trump's national security justifications for acquiring Greenland in some way, more or less hybrid, are bogus. Just like Putin's national security justifications for trying to acquire political control over Ukraine are bogus. Putin has regime security justifications, but his national security justifications are bogus. In other words, his regime security justifications aren't very pretty. They're not ones we should be impressed by, but they're about his thoughts about him staying in power. Whereas the national security reasons for war that are often presented on behalf of the Putin regime actually aren't believed, by the Putin regime itself. So that means when it comes to Trump and Greenland, that one thing is out of the window. The thing that perhaps still most people are mostly talking about, which is, guys, let's get really diplomatically serious. And let's have a very serious conversation. What are the ways in which the United States wants to maximize security in that region? And, how can we possibly accommodate that and comply with it? The trouble is that the national security justifications that Trump's offering are post-truth. Not just in the sense they're false, but in the sense that they're plural, they're not all consistent, and they're a cover for a motivation that really has little to do with national security. I mean, notice how clear the United States is about what it wants Europe to do on Ukraine, so the United States carries on doing certain things that Europe wants to do. There is no such conversation about Greenland because national security is not the real reason. And so the notion that we've got to get diplomatically serious and appeal to Trump properly and explain to him properly what a rational conception of U.S. national security is going to be there, if only he grasps it properly, all of that is complete pie in the sky because it doesn't even start with the basic understanding of the motives. Now, the good news, although most news about Europeans' capacity to act is bad, the good news is that it's my strong read that most people in European corridors of power understand that this is not about national security for Trump. They don't know what to do about that. They don't know how to stop Trump, but at least they understand that. Now, another thing to understand in these waters, we've just said this kind of diplomacy is fruitless. Another thing to understand is that Trump, and I'm not going to give you a neurological explanation of this, but Trump has a special problem with rigidity. And it's about owning stuff, as opposed to having enough effective control over the stuff to get your needs and your interests properly met. So it's like somebody who wants a marquee for their post-wedding reception, and they can rent one, they can buy it. If they rent it, they'll just use it on that occasion. They won't need it again. So kind of renting seems rational, but not for Trump. He's not having the marquee unless he gets to own it. And a conversation like, but you can have the same marquee for your wedding. You're not going to lose anything by renting it. No, I'm not having the damn marquee unless I get to own it. And it's very important that Trump has that rigidity. And that means two things, practically. A, he's capable of going very far with this. And B, he may be dissatisfied with certain hybrid forms of the acquisition of Denmark that somebody else would be satisfied. I think one more thing I want to put on the table for us now is just the psychology of this from the point of view of a citizen who is watching the world sort of implode. This is part of a pattern that would be happening anyway, and I know you know that, but I need you to know that, and I know most of you don't yet, because it's a bit shocking. Remove Trump, somebody is going to try to acquire Denmark in the 2030s, an authoritarian US leader. So understand that it's not that things are relatively okay and we have the orange monstrosity there. The orange monstrosity is there because things are not okay. The trouble, however, is that this is self-perpetuating, because when you get not okay people into office because things are not okay, they misbehave and accelerate the extent to which things are not okay, which then invites even less okay people into office, and on that goes. But understand that this is a pattern, a Putinist pattern of conduct on the international stage and domestically that will persist, right, with or without Trump, or at least persist as one of the very strong candidates for power. And so it's very important that we begin coming to terms with that pattern, coming to terms with what it means to live in a world like that, with what it means to challenge the trend of the world becoming more like that. But what we don't want to do is think that at any point X, things have got as bad as they're going to get, and then they should really stay as bad or even get better. And if they don't, we're shocked. No, things are going to get worse. Things are getting worse, right? There's a untethering on the global political stage that is going to continue. And so it's going to deliver lots of shocks for us. And we've got to be focused more on our if we're going to have anxieties, we're going to be focused more on our anxieties about the patterns rather than our anxieties about the latest instantiation of the pattern. Lost you there briefly. So something else that's really important here is that it's time for the Europeans to begin using different language about Trump. And it's time for the Europeans to understand that the dance, you're dancing with the coercion emanating out of the United States, is a long-distance dance. And so the idea that you're going to take a hit in it in the short term by not overreacting, by being accommodating, by being conciliatory, that is going to work for you just on the first step or the second step of this process, of this dance. But when you're at step 7, you're going to realize that the initial conciliatoriness was counterproductive. That's very hard for the intensely short-termist mind of a practical politician to grasp. So Europe's got to start acting differently. Europe's got to start talking differently. And we'll say a little bit more in detail, of course, about what that means, because this is a very difficult predicament, right? It's a predicament in which the Europeans are so dependent on the United States that they can't, in a non-self-immolatory way, just press a button and detach themselves. On the other hand, there is such a thing as being too defensive and too complacent and too slow and too much in denial in the way you begin to understand what sustainable and strategic decoupling actually looks like in practice. So putting this all together, and this is only 2 or 3 of the many points that we need to make about this, see this as a version of normal. As abnormal as this is, see this as a version of normal, right? See this as a kind of a product of the social forces that are also causing other bad things happening in the world, right? The social forces that are bringing it about, that Putin invades Ukraine, are not different in substance by much to the social forces that are bringing it about that Trump is keen to take Greenland. So we've got to understand what the, if you like, to use a horrendously scientific term, the social physics is of the various global forces driving the change we are seeing. And we've got to focus on that rather than the latest instantiation of calamity, because we need to see the arc of calamity. That's going to be both better for our nervous system, and it's going to be better for us as citizens who are prepared to then reflect on what more sustainable longer-term responses are, as opposed to fleeting, a series of sort of ever repeating fleeting panics about the latest thing that happens. We'll be together much more about this soon. Lots of love.